All righty. So we are recording. Actually, speaking of just that, I should start this recording after I mentioned those. But anybody, I guess, Silas, I guess you're the only one with the camera on right now. If you don't mind having your camera on, keep it on. I love it. I love getting to see your guys' faces. But I know some people are like, nervous about like being on YouTube and stuff. Like I am recording this, it will go up on YouTube. If you're worried about that, you don't have to have your camera on. That being said, I love it when you guys do. I love it when the cameras are on because it's just nice to see. It's nice to look back and see if we're going, yeah, that makes sense. So you can keep it on, you can keep it off. It's up to you guys. Just make sure you're here and listening. All right, so we are talking about metabolism. So metabolism, or particularly like cellular metabolism, is really a big part of the personal training industry. Understanding like how we produce our own energy in order to keep ourselves moving. Love that, Amber. Is a huge part of like how life is going to work. So we're going to talk about metabolism as a big overview here, right? Our objectives today, we want to understand metabolism in general and its two components, which are going to be anabolism and catabolism. Those are opposites of one another. We want to talk about like what happens during, we call it an oxidation reduction reaction. Don't worry about that term. Cellular respiration, how we actually split up some water molecules and use water to combine molecules. And then we'll talk a little bit about our different metabolic pathways today. So as just a very brief overview, when we talk about metabolism, chances are it's conjuring up an image of in your head of like, okay, yeah, it's how many calories I burn. Or it's like how fast, it's like that one guy who gets hungry all the time. He's always hungry. He's got a fast metabolism, and metabolism is so much more than that. It's actually, it's a lot, it's any and all chemical reactions that take place within the body. So metabolism is literally, if it's a chemical reaction, it's part of your metabolism. So a potato chip hits your taste buds, boom, and like you get that like salty, tangy like flavor. That like chemical getting released and broken down to like send those signals to your brain, that's part of your metabolism. That potato chip going into your stomach and sitting in your stomach acid, and acid reacting with the chip and breaking it apart and busting it, right? That's part of your metabolism. It passing into your bloodstream and getting picked up by a red blood cell, that's part of your metabolism. Carried to a tissue and then given to that tissue so that that tissue can break it down and turn it into this really high energy molecule. That's part of your metabolism. So metabolism is literally any and all chemical reactions. If it's a chemical reaction happening on you, that's your metabolism, right? So there are sort of two components of this, right? There's the breaking the chip down, but then what about like taking the chip and turning it into something else? What about building it back up into something different? Well, that's where we have our two sort of directions that metabolism kind of go in, right? We have anabolism or anabolic reactions. Oh God, cancel that. I gotta uninstall that thing. Anabolic reactions. Anabolic reactions or anabolism is the bonding of smaller molecules to form larger molecules. It's a building up reaction. So like anabolic reactions, think about like, this is a terrible example, but you think about like anabolic steroids, right? Like steroids that people can take. They call them anabolic steroids. They call them that because they blow you up. Like they make you, get much bigger. They're very anabolic, that's where they get their name from. Versus like catabolic reactions or catabolism. Catabolism is the breaking down of complex molecules into something simpler. So if we look at like that potato chip that I mentioned earlier, right? That potato chip is going to be a really big, long, super complicated chain of carbohydrates. Now, chips actually oftentimes have, some carbohydrates in, and then most of what they are is like fat. But the components that are actually kind of holding the chip together, mostly carbohydrates, right? Like if you look at like a potato chip, you know, it's a slice of potato, right? So complex. So when you look at like what that actually looks like on a chemical level, if you just look at the chemistry of it, you'll notice it actually looks something kind of like this. So this little guy all by itself is a single sugar molecule. And if you linked him together with another sugar molecule, you would have a double sugar molecule. You link it with a third one, you would have a triple sugar molecule. And then eventually you just have, you know, we don't want to have to keep naming triple, quadruple, was it septuple or something, whatever 5 is, right? Not a math teacher. But we just call it a polysaccharide. We call it a polycarbohydrate, where there's actually just many little sugar molecules linked together, right? So this is actually kind of what that potato chip looks like on a soda. It's this big, long, complicated chain of all these little tiny individual sugars, right? You put a whole bunch of individual sugars together into one big chain, that's a complex carbohydrate now, which potatoes are. I mean, potato chips a little bit less complex, but like a potato is very complex. So our body needs to be able to break that down. That's where our catabolism really comes in. Catabolism is the breaking down of complex molecules into their simpler components. So if we take this example here, you know, like let's just say, you know, I take this this chain here, and then I'm like, you know what, I'm going to break this off, and I grab this and I break it over there, and then I grab this one and I put it over there, right? I'm digesting this carbohydrate now, right? And now I'm left with individual sugar molecules, right? I catabolically took this big complex thing and I broke it down into, you know, something much, much, much simpler, right? This is very simple. That's very simple. That's very simple. Each one of those things is very simple. Now, I could do the exact opposite of this as well. I could reassemble these into whatever shape I want to. And so I can put them back together if I so choose, right? And that is where anabolic reactions come in. You know, attaching attaching this all together here, this is, you know, making a big complex thing. That's an anabolic reaction. So catabolic reactions break stuff down to give you ingredients. Anabolic reactions use those ingredients to build stuff back up. So whatever chemical reaction you are doing in the body, it is either going to be anabolic or catabolic. And any chemical reaction is, that's what we're talking about when we say metabolism. So that's what we're trying to understand today. We're trying to understand our metabolism as an overall. So whenever you get a chemical change taking place within like a living creature, you know, as like an organism grows or as it tries to maintain its body functions, right? Or if it just tries to like produce energy, eliminate waste, digest things, right? All of those are part of your metabolism. So anabolism is the bonding of smaller molecules to form larger molecules. Again, that is the anabolic stuff. Let's not use an example here. Let's go ahead and wipe this and let's look at an amino acid chain, right? So we're going to get into this in a little bit, but amino acids, they look just like carbohydrates. You can see here. Oh, that's unfortunate that is the wrong empty background. God dang it. How about this one? No, it's also an empty background. Oh, internet, come on, help me out. Be a pal. So here are amino acids, right? Amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So, you know, this, let's just say that, you know, this is an individual amino acid here, and then this one would be, I guess it would start there. An amino, actually, I'm feeling that it probably would have been that. Yeah, that would have been the amino acid. There, and then that one would be there. So here's 3 amino acids, right? You know, this maybe came from a piece of steak or something. Heck, we'd call this, maybe this is leucine, isoleucine, and valine. Maybe this is the 3 branch chain amino acids, you know, maybe this is the weightlifter supplement. But now what's going to happen is like your digestive system is going to break them down, right? It's going to take it and break them all apart. That's your catabolic reaction. And now, because it's done that, what it can do is it can be like, all right, well, I need to make new owl-shaped stuff. You know, I need to make new owl skin. And so boom, it, you know, your skin is maybe what this, you know, looks like this as a chain, right? Which is slightly different looking than it did a second ago. But that's because like a chicken breast is probably going to be very different looking than a human's breast muscle, you know? Like that's one thing that people sometimes don't understand, you know, about metabolism is you would think that you would need to eat protein to make protein, or you would need to eat, you know, muscle to make muscle, and you need to eat enzymes to make enzymes. But no, your body can take muscle, skin, and break it down and then build it back up into enzymes or DNA. It can build it back up into anything it needs to. That's why you will often hear catabolism, which is the breaking down part, fuels anabolism, okay? So oftentimes in order to have an anabolic reaction, we have to break something down with a catabolic reaction first. Any questions so far, everybody? How are we all doing?
I'm feeling pretty good. It's making sense so far.
Love that.
Good, yeah, pretty simple.
Cool.
Doing great, understandable.
All right, well, I've got a very nerdy video to show you. So we are gonna be diving in. The next 12 weeks are gonna be heavy Hank Green videos. I don't know if anybody knows who Hank Green is. I'm a really big fan of his. But he's one of the guys that does Crash Course. And these videos are like free educational videos that are on YouTube, and they are absolutely awesome. And they just go directly with our program. Like it's almost like these were made for us, you know? So I've got a little video to show you here. Let's see here, Crash Course Metabolism. Is it this one? I need to see further into this video's preview. Yeah, that's the one. Okay. All right. So little video here that's going to kind of explain things. I love these videos because they have really great animations. And then also Hank is just a master of explaining stuff. So here we go.
I weigh about 80 kilograms. Most of that, let's say 64%, is water, though you can't tell by looking. I mean, as organisms go, I like to think that I look fairly solid. After water, the next largest proportion of me is protein, about 16%. Not just in my muscles, but also in things like the tiny sodium-potassium pumps in my neurons, and the hemoglobin in my blood, and the enzymes driving the chemical reactions in every one of my 37 trillion cells. And another 16% of me is fat, which I'm totally okay with. 4% of me is minerals, like the calcium and phosphorus in my bones and the iron in my blood, and 1% is carbohydrates, most of which is either being consumed as I talk to you or is sitting around as glycogen waiting to be used. But here's the thing, it's not like I just ate 80 kilograms of food and then all this happened. Instead, my body, like yours, is constantly acquiring stuff, extracting some of it to keep, burning some of it for energy, and getting rid of the rest. But even the stuff that my body does hold on to doesn't last forever. Some of the chemicals that I absorb in my food eventually become a part of me, but enzymes wear out and membranes break down and DNA gets oxidized, so they get discarded. And then I need more of those chemicals to reconstruct the material that I've lost. As a result, over the course of my lifetime, my cells will synthesize somewhere between 225 and 450 kilograms of protein. That's like 3 or 4 or 5 separate me's just made of protein. And all the protein and fat and carbohydrates and nucleic acids that make up me, of course, come from food. Every organism has to keep taking in and breaking down food to keep resupplying itself with the raw materials it needs to survive. And all that activity requires energy, which we also gain from food. So how do our bodies actually convert what we eat into energy and raw materials? The answer is a never-ending series of reactions that are dedicated to doing two vital and totally contradictory things. One set of chemical reactions destroys the reactants that you give them, reducing big, complex substances into molecular rubble, and the other set reassembles that rubble into new and bigger products that are put together again to make you. So our bodies are constantly reinventing themselves in a perpetual state of loss, but also always rebuilding. And even though all of this is happening at the cellular level, its consequences could hardly be larger. These two sets of reactions are where everything that we've learned so far about the digestive, endocrine, circulatory, and respiratory systems really starts to come together. Together, these processes make up your metabolism. Now, the sciencey word metabolism has come to have a meaning in popular speech, but metabolism isn't just one thing. People talk about metabolism as meaning like how fast your body burns the fuel in your food or how high your personal energy level is, and that's fine for use by personal trainers and fitness magazines. But physiologically, metabolism really describes every single biochemical reaction that goes on in your body. And maybe more importantly, it reconciles two conflicting chemical processes that are always simultaneously underway inside of you. One of those chemical forces is anabolism. Anabolic reactions construct things and consume energy. These are the processes that take the small monomer building blocks in your food, like monosaccharides and fatty and amino acids, and build them into bigger, more complex polymers like carbs and fats and proteins that are used in your cells. Then, when you need new building blocks or you need to release some energy, those polymers in your body, or new ones in your food, get broken up by catabolic reactions. The processes of catabolism break down bigger molecules, and in breaking their bonds, release the energy you need to stay warm and move around and provide your cells with fuel to build those polymers back up again. To be honest, your metabolism is a lot like Sisyphus. It works really hard, but it is never finished. And the boulder that your inner Sisyphus is always pushing uphill and watching fall back down, that's nutrients, the molecules that your body is forever breaking up and then rebuilding only to have them break apart again. And these nutrients, the materials that your body needs to build, maintain, and repair itself, come in 6 major groups. By volume, the majority of what we consume and what makes up our bodies is water, so that's maybe the most vital nutrient. Then there are vitamins, compounds that come in either fat-soluble or water-soluble forms. They aren't used as building blocks or for energy, but they're essential in helping the body make use of other nutrients that do those things. Vitamin C, for example, helps improve iron absorption, while vitamin K is crucial to blood clotting, and some B vitamins are important in the production of ATP from glucose. Minerals, like vitamins, don't provide fuel, but they have all sorts of other functions. Calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus harden bones and teeth, while iron is, of course, crucial in hemoglobin. Plus, potassium, sodium, and chlorine help maintain your body's pH balance and are used in action potentials. So water, vitamins, and minerals are all necessary. But the 3 major nutrients that everyone always talks about, the ones you find on food labels from oatmeal to Pop-Tarts, are carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Most of the carbohydrates you've ever eaten, with the exception of lactose in milk, originally came from plants. Mono and disaccharides come from fruits, honey, sugar beets, and sugarcane, while polysaccharide starches come from veggies and grains. The main thing you need to know is that the monosaccharide glucose is the be-all, end-all molecular fuel that your cells need to make ATP. ATP being the molecule that your cells use to drive anabolic reactions when they need to make new polymers or get anything else done, whether that's operating a sodium-potassium pump or detaching the head of a myosin filament to contract a muscle. But ATP is too unstable to store, so cells often store energy in the form of glucose, which they can then catabolize and convert to ATP when they need it. Now, some of your cells can get their energy from fats, but many of the most important ones, like your neurons and red blood cells, feed exclusively on glucose, so most of the carbs that your intestines absorb are converted to glucose for that reason. But if it's not needed right away, that energy can also get stored as glycogen in your liver and muscles, or converted to glycerol and fatty acids to make triglyceride fats. And even though there seems to be some kind of marketing war going on against dietary fats, we most definitely need them. The fats in your adipose tissue store energy, of course, but they also store fat-soluble vitamins and cushion your organs. Lipids also form the myelin that insulates the neurons in your brain and throughout your body, as well as the oil in your skin, and they provide the vital calorie content found in breast milk. But there are other important important lipids like cholesterol, which is the precursor to things like testosterone and estrogen, and of course phospholipids, which form the cell membrane in every single one of the 3 dozen or so trillion cells you have. Now, if you're into eating meat, a lot of the fat you ingest might come from that, but guess what? Plants have fat too. Plants use lipids for energy storage just like we do, except they do it in fruits and nuts and seeds, which, when you think of it, are kind of like plant breast milk. It's food for their growing babies. Either way though, when you eat lipids, your body breaks down triglycerides into glycerol and fatty acids. Those molecules can then be processed and used in the making of ATP, or they might be converted into other kinds of fatty acids, which your cells can then reassemble into your very own triglycerides or phospholipids. And your liver happens to be great at converting one fatty acid into another, but there are some it just can't synthesize. For example, omega-6 and 3 fatty acids are called essential fatty acids because your body can't make them, so they have to be ingested. They get turned into all kinds of useful molecules like the ones used for synapse formation in the brain and for signaling inflammation during the healing process. But if carbohydrates provide energy and fats insulate and store energy, then just about everything else is done with proteins. They form the bulk of your muscle and connective tissue, but they're also what the ion channels and pumps are made of in your neurons and muscle cells, and they make up your enzymes, which are responsible for pretty much every chemical reaction in your body. In other words, your body runs on protein, and pretty much is protein. Nutritionally speaking, meats, dairy products, eggs, legumes, nuts, cereals are all particularly high in protein. But because everything we eat was once alive and every cell of every living thing contains protein, as long as you're eating whole foods, you're at least partially restocking your protein supplies. That might seem like you'd have to eat muscle to make muscle or eat enzymes to make enzymes, but that's not how it works. Since all your proteins are made up of just 20 amino acids, the differences between the thousands of unique proteins are simply in the sequence of those amino acids. And of course, you have a specialized molecule that knows just which amino acids to put together in what order to make a certain protein. It's called DNA. When you consume some hamburger, for example, the protein actin in the meat gets catabolized into its component amino acids, which gets mixed up with all of the amino acids from all the other proteins in the meat, like the collagen and elastin and titin and myosin, as well as all of the proteins from the bun and the tomato and the mayonnaise. Those amino acids then get reassembled using anabolic reactions into your very own but somewhat different proteins as defined by your DNA. Each cell is like a picky little Gordon Ramsay, and it has to have every amino acid needed, every ingredient present, before it will even think about starting to make a protein. And just like with your lipids, your cells can improvise and convert some amino acids into others if they're missing an ingredient. However, there are 9 essential amino acids that you cannot make from others and have to eat. Now, lots of foods don't provide every essential amino acid, but when you combine foods like beans and rice or pasta and cheese, you do get all of the essential amino acids, which is important because, remember, after water, you are mostly made of protein, on the order of 16%. But what about the 1% of you, the carbohydrates? How that tiniest fraction of you ends up creating all of the energy is what we'll discover next time. But for now, you've learned all about the vital nutrients, including water, vitamins, minerals, carbs, fats, and proteins, as well as how anabolic reactions build structures and require energy, while catabolic reactions tear things apart and release energy. And together, these competing forces form the wonderfully conflicted process known as metabolism. Thank you to our headmaster of learning, Linnea Boyev, and thanks to all of our Patreon patrons whose monthly contributions help make Crash Course possible, not only for themselves, but for everyone everywhere. If you like Crash Course and want to help us keep making videos like this, you can go to patreon.com/crashcourse. This episode was filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney Crash Course studio. It was written by Kathleen Yale, edited by Blake DiPestino, and her consultant is Dr. Brandon Jackson. It was directed by Nicholas Jenkins, edited by Nicole Sweeney. Our sound designer is Michael Aranda, and the graphics team is Thought Cafe.
Okay. I always like to make sure that I show the credits at the end, since I'm using this for free. So obviously there's a lot going on here. You know, he just gave you basically a brief overview of all the stuff we're going to go over like 12 days, which is nice because, you know, he did it in 10 minutes. We'll do it in 12 days. So we'll go much more in depth and make it make a little bit more sense. But hopefully now that'll be kind of rattling around in your brain. And as I sort of mention things, you'll kind of, you know, be like, oh, I remember seeing that animation, or I remember when he said that in the video. So Let's talk about anabolic reactions. So if we're looking at sort of an overview here, we just got done talking about how we're building stuff up, taking stuff and building it together, or we're breaking it apart, right? Those are the two things. So we need to have a chemical reaction that is going to fuel that, right? So we've got two major chemical reactions. We've got one, which is called dehydration synthesis. And it works like this. I'm actually going to go ahead and just steal this from my own thing there. So this is dehydration synthesis in action. And basically what's happening here is you can see this is an individual sugar right here, right? So this is an individual like little glucose molecule, and this is an individual glucose molecule. And you'll notice that they're separate, right? Like this little plus sign here doesn't mean anything. I can just delete that. Like these are totally just separate molecules. They are not connected to one another. But you'll notice, like if you look at the two of them, see how like there's a little hydrogen right here, it's a little H right there, and then there's a little oxygen right there. And then there's another hydrogen on this side. And like you can see, like that's the same formula you're going to see in every carbohydrate, right? Like there's the OH right there, right? So every carbohydrate kind of has the same little sections here. Now, if you were to steal this hydrogen molecule from this guy, like let's say we just take this and we put this over here, right? And then we steal this hydrogen molecule from this guy, and we put this over here, and then we steal this oxygen molecule from this guy, and we put this over here. Well, now what we've got is like two really unhappy molecules, right? Like this guy's like, hey, he stole my hydrogen. This guy's like, well, he stole my hydrogen and my oxygen. Both of them are really unhappy, right? And this guy right here, he's still got this little oxygen molecule. So what's going to actually happen is he's going to go ahead and put this right here. And because both of these like individual molecules had their hydrogen and oxygen taken away from them, they're going to kind of bond together and say like, you know what, that was really unfair. I'm sorry that that happened to you. And what they're going to do is they're actually going to create a bond between the two. They're both going to share this oxygen molecule that's left. And what that does is that links these two molecules together. And now you have a slightly more complex thing. This is how your body was built. You had a bunch of different chemicals laying around, and then, we pulled a little bit of like hydrogen and a little bit of oxygen off, and then all of a sudden the molecules are and they get linked together, and they get linked together, and another one linked together until eventually you get this big, long, complex chain that we call DNA. And then that DNA is basically your program. It tells your body like how to assemble more and more and more and more molecules until eventually you have a U-shaped person in the world, and so like this is how we create. This is what an anabolic reaction actually is. Now, we're using a carbohydrate as an example here. This could happen in an amino acid. It could happen in fats, actually. Any material linking together, but what we did is we pulled these three ingredients out here, right? We pulled a little bit of hydrogen and a little bit of hydrogen and a little bit of oxygen out of there. So if we go, if we've got an H molecule here, a little hydrogen, and then over here we got another hydrogen, and we got an oxygen here. So we have H plus O left over afterwards, right? Well, you know what that means? That means that we have two H's and an O, more commonly referred to as H2O, aka water. So by sucking a little bit of the ingredients of water away from this carbohydrate and sucking a couple of the ingredients for water away from this carbohydrate, these two carbohydrates got attracted to one another and they linked up. So that's why it's called dehydration synthesis. If you think about like what those words mean, it's dehydrate means to take the water out of something, right? And synthesis means to make something. Like you always hear it in sci-fi movies, right? It's like, Batman or something is working and he's like, I gotta synthesize a cure, like that's what synthesis is, right? It's to sort of chemically make something. So this is the process of building up complex molecules. And we do it by dehydrating two separate simple molecules. If we can do that, we can create stuff. So you can see here, this is like an individual sugar, and then there's another individual sugar, and then it's just kind of highlighting the fact it's like, oh, look, there's the H and there's the H and the O, right? So individual sugar, we pull that H2O out of there, right? And now the H is missing from over here and the HO is missing from over here. So now they share this oxygen molecule and they link together, right? And we could do that in the really big, long, complicated chains. That's why there are literally billions of molecules of carbohydrates that you're eating every single day, which would be totally ridiculous for us to have to measure. So instead, we measure them in grams of carbohydrates. But a gram of carbohydrates would have a lot of individual sugar molecules in it. So that's dehydration synthesis. Does that make sense, everybody? Does anybody have any questions on that? Did that kind of come together pretty clearly? Hopefully. That's one of our more confusing topics. Yeah, feeling good? Thumbs up all around? All right. Oh, and this, by the way, Silas and Al, this is what I like to do. If you got a little thumbs up thing, you can throw that my way, or you can get on that. You can do an actual thumbs up. Yeah, there's a thumbs up button, I think, somewhere. I don't know how to do it myself, which is hilarious. But I see you guys do it all the time. Yeah, I'm just like saying. So if you ever want to do that, or also there's a raise hand feature. Whenever that happens, I get a little flash on my screen, so I know to I can be like, hey, we get a question. But yes, you guys don't have to use the thumbs up feature. You can keep your camera on and go like this, or you can just unmute and be like, yep, we got it. But I like to check in. I don't want to. I don't want to talk as fast as Hank, basically, and this is how I slow down. So that is how dehydration synthesis works. But so that is how we have our anabolic reactions, right? Anabolic reactions are going to be dehydration synthesis. Now, what about catabolic reactions? What about oh, actually, hold on. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So you can also do this in amino acids. This example here is a carbohydrate. Sorry, I'm just trying to erase all this so we don't have it muddling up our picture there. So this is this right here is what happened with a carbohydrate. This doesn't have to just be carbohydrates. Like I said, it can be fats, it can be proteins as well. Let's go ahead and look at dehydration synthesis of a protein. You can see the exact same thing is happening here. The same ingredients are sort of present. Oh wait, that's not what I need to do. So you can see like this right here is one individual amino acid, right? And then this one is another individual amino acid. And you'll notice they're kind of circling it here. If you look carefully, you can see, right? There's a little bit of oxygen there, there's a little bit of hydrogen there, and there's a little bit of hydrogen there. So if we pull this hydrogen over here and we pull this oxygen over here and this hydrogen over here, well, now this little oxygen molecule is going to be attracted. And so what it'll do is they'll link together, and that's what you're seeing down here, right? So they all link together with this chain, and then that water is just going to go off and be a little molecule on its own, and that's the thing. We pull the water out, and that causes things to get linked together. By the way, you've done dehydration synthesis plenty. I mean, obviously, if you're a living organism, you've done it plenty in your life. But you've done this when you're doing your laundry. You've done this when you are at the beach creating a sand castle. You know, like what do, right? You add a ton of water to that sand, and then like you need to get a lot of that water drained out. And as that like drains out, well, sand molecules, they kind of like to stick together or like glue, you know? That's what we're doing. And you think about like you leave like a grape out in the sun, you know, and then all the water gets dehydrated out of it, you know, it does kind of shrink down, but that actually makes a lot of like more sugar molecules. And that's why like a lot of times raisins, which are not everybody's favorite food in the world, are a little bit sweeter than maybe like a grape would be. And it's because they're a little bit more like tightly lumped together. You know, that's dehydration synthesis. You dehydrate stuff and stuff links together. Tomorrow we're going to get into the digestive system, and we're going to talk about like how dehydration synthesis is responsible for making our poops, which gets real gross real fast. But all right, so the opposite of dehydration synthesis. What about, we got to be able to break stuff down too, right? What I need to take a slice of bread and turn it into sugar molecules, you know? Well, that's where catabolic reactions like hydrolysis come in. So hydrolysis is the decomposition of molecules like carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, you know, any carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, right? Basically, it's where a water molecule shoves itself between another molecule. So like, we're just going to literally play this exactly the same, but in reverse, right? So let's say we'll go ahead and get rid of, put this back, you know, let's say we got this guy right here, you know, which remember, this is what we were creating by breaking it down a minute ago. Well, now what if I have extra water over here? What if I have extra hydrogen and extra oxygen, right? H2O. What if I've got extra pieces? Well, that means I've got an extra H, I've got an extra H, and I've got an extra O. So if I were to shove that hydrogen molecule right over here, and then I take this oxygen molecule and I shove it right over there, and then I squeeze this hydrogen molecule like right over here. Well, now what that's going to do is it's going to break that molecule in half. And now I had two, you know, linked together amino acids that I broke apart. Now I've got two individual amino acids. That's what your digestive system does, is it basically uses hydrolysis to split up molecules into their individual components. So like if you got a big, you know, you did potato, right? Big complex chain of sugars, right? How did I break each of those sugars off? I shoved a water molecule in between each one of them. And that water broke them apart. This is also why, again, think about taking a slice of bread, dropping it in water, right? You'll notice it'll puff up, right? Because water will move itself between, it'll push those molecules apart, create more space. Water loves to do that. Water loves to move itself between things. It likes to just get in there and kind of separate stuff out. So that's hydrolysis, coming from the word hydro, which is obviously referring to water. And then you're going to hear this term a lot in my class, but lysis. Lysis is a chemical reaction, usually involving like breaking something down. So, so hydrolysis is water breaking stuff down. So this involves the decomposition of molecules by splitting them with a molecule of water. So we go back to that idea that like catabolism fuels anabolism, right? Let's say I eat, you know, like, let's say you eat like a chicken breast, right? You know, you went to the gym, you worked out really, really hard, you know, and you did some push-ups and you tore up your chest, and your chest is really sore, and you're like, oh God, you know, you're like, man, that was a really good like chest workout. I'm really sore, I'm beat up, you know, this is great, I'm going to get so much muscle out of this, right? So then you go home and you're like, all right, I need to build new chest muscle, which means I need to give myself the fuel necessary. And so you decide to eat like a chicken breast. It's not like your body goes, oh, is that chicken breast? Oh, that's perfect, put that right here. You know, like that's not quite how it works. Instead, what your body does is it goes, all right, that's a protein. And a protein is this big, long, super complicated chain of, amino acids all linked together. And so what it does, it takes all of those amino acids and it breaks every one of them apart until eventually you've got nothing but a pool of amino acids. And now we can assemble them into, you know, Daryl shaped stuff or Eric shaped stuff or Amber shaped stuff or Marjan shaped stuff, right? Like we can just arrange that in whatever shape we need it to be in, right? And this is why everybody looks a little different. You know, like we have like different types of proteins. How does your body know how to make like skin versus how to make muscle? Well, your blueprint is responsible for that. That's where your DNA comes in. You know, everybody's going to have slightly different DNA. You're getting that, you know, that's our genetics and stuff. But like at the end of the day, the chemical process is exactly the same. And this is why nutrition is a big part of this module. When we're talking about like energy, we got to talk about nutrition in sync with it, because like they go hand in hand. If you don't have good nutrition, you're not going to have the ingredients necessary to build yourself back up. This is why I don't love the, you hear people say this all the time. They're like, eat carbohydrates before you work out, eat protein after you work out. And it's like, we need, you know, that's, I get where that advice comes from. It's not bad. But like, if you don't have sufficient protein before you start working out, you can start breaking stuff down too early. And then that repair process isn't keeping up. And so then you end up catabolizing. Your body goes, well, we've got too much muscle because I'm not getting enough fuel in my diet to repair this much muscle. So you know what? Let's get rid of some of the muscle. So it catabolizes your own muscle. You hear people say, by the way, you'll hear people use the word it cannibalizes your muscle, like a cannibal. It's actually not inaccurate in some capacity. Like it's actually a fairly, you know, accurate description of what's happening. It is your body eating itself, you know, if it doesn't have the ingredients necessary. But it is scientifically, that's a catabolic reaction. You're breaking it, you're catabolizing. But you'll hear people say cannibalizing a lot. Like I've heard like very smart people say that, which is always kind of funny. So we got to be able to control all these metabolic reactions. We either need to, you know, make them happen really quickly or maybe happen very slowly, depending on how we're going to do that. And so like whether it's a neuron or a muscle or a blood cell, you know, they're going to carry out these different chemical reactions in various different types of ways. And so there's all kinds of different chemicals out there, but they are all sort of under the control of this particular chemical that we call an enzyme. And an enzyme is actually an example of a protein, believe it or not. Enzymes are proteins that basically act like the ignition to your car. So like an enzyme is a specialized protein that coordinates these chemical changes. Like how did we get water to decide that it was going to shove it? Did I close the thing? I sure did. How do we get water to decide that it was going to shove itself between those two molecules? How do we get water to get sucked out of those two molecules, right? Well, that's kind of what enzymes do. Enzymes are specialized proteins that coordinate chemical changes that help kick off metabolic reactions. So your body is constantly producing new tissue and stuff, for sure. You know, your body's making new muscle, right? I mean, if I go like this, watch. That right there, you know, I just damaged my skin on like a really tiny microscopic level. You can't really see, you know, but I guarantee you, like microscopically, you know, this is nasty, but like I got like little bits of skin probably like embedded into my fingernails now. I'm gonna have some little red lines show up any second now. You know, I created a little bit of like cellular damage. And what's going to happen next is my body's going to go, oh gosh, our skin got damaged. And so it's going to repair it. And it's going to make me-shaped skin. You know, it's going to make based on like my DNA and stuff. And so it's going to take any of the protein that I eat. I mean, I just had a coffee, which had some milk in it, right? So I got some proteins in that. And it's going to take that big, long chain of complicated protein, break it down into individual amino acids, and then it's going to assemble those amino acids in Brad-shaped skin. Do you have a question, Amber? Or did you bump it? I saw you unmute for just a second. You're muted now, just so you know. Nope. Oh, I see. This happened earlier. I fell for this with Al earlier. Is this Amber 2.0? Oh no, this must be our new guy. Oh, hold on just a second. Hey, Mohammed. Oh, Mohammed, can you hear me? Is that, sorry guys. Hey, can you hear me? Mohammed, can you hear me?
Yes. How are you?
There we go.
Sorry about that. It's just new connection. Sorry, I'm so sorry.
No sweat, no sweat. Welcome. So we're a little bit into it now. So I'm gonna, so we can chat after class and I can get you caught up. But I'm gonna go ahead and keep moving through like where we're at, and then we'll catch you up here.
Nice.
All right, good to have you.
Sorry, today I work and then behind my work, I install Zoom and then I come to class. I'm so sorry about that today.
Hey,
Like
it happens. Yeah, we'll plan for it, 8:30 every day after this, and then we'll be all set, no sweat.
Okay.
Yeah, glad to have you though. If you can do me a favor,
sorry.
and then just use your mute feature just while I'm chatting, and then anytime you have a question, like unmute, pop in, chime in, be like, excuse me, what? Ask questions whenever you need to.
Okay. So today we don't need class right now.
We don't need what?
Today is not class, right?
No, yeah, it is.
Oh.
Yeah, it is class. Okay. We're in the middle of it right now.
Okay, thank you so much. I just tested Zoom. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. No
Have
sweat.
a good day.
All right.
Right.
Yeah, no sweat. I guess maybe not fully joining us. All right. So so when we're talking about enzymes, right? So their job, like I said, is to kick off these chemical reactions. So, how is my body going to reassemble all those new skin proteins and fix all that damage that I just created? Well, it's going to use little enzyme reactions to get those amino acids attracted to one another to where they start linking up. So enzymes are responsible for coordinating these chemical changes. If anybody in here has ever been like working out really regularly and you're just like in the groove, and like you get like really strong, you maybe get your cardio really improved. You're like, I'm in the best shape I've ever been in. I can play sports, and then you go on like a week-long vacation. Maybe you don't exercise for a week. And then that first workout session that you're back in the gym, usually like strength is going to feel rough a week after, but like anybody who's ever done cardio for the first time after not having done it for maybe just a week or even 2 weeks, it feels like you're starting back at square one on that first like day back. And then it actually gets better very quickly after that. Like you're back to where you were in no time. But what's the deal with that first workout? Why was that so rough the first time back? Well, the reason why is because part of the chemical reactions that help, give you the oxygen while you're exercising are enzymes. And enzymes just don't live that long. They're kind of a fast living, fast dying little protein inside the body. So when you exercise, you create enzymes that make you better at exercising. But if you don't do that every like 24 to 48 to 72 hours, they kind of just die off pretty quickly. And so a week of not exercising is enough for your enzymes to kind of die, some of your enzymes to kind of die off. So then your body's like, how do I use this oxygen again? I forgot. And then like it needs these enzymes to kind of help you kind of kick that all off. But that's why like even a week kind of makes it feel really rough. And by the way, this is a good explanation. This is a good little piece of information to log away so you can explain it to your clients, because your clients will go like, oh, I feel like I lost all my progress. And it's like, not really. It's going to feel that way for the first like day or two back. But no, you're going to be right back to where you were in no time because the equipment's still all there. You're not like you lost muscle. You just kind of lost this thing that allows you to kick off these chemical reactions quickly and efficiently, So enzymes coordinate chemical reactions. You'll often hear sometimes that They work in a lock and key mechanism. You'll sometimes hear this term. And this is a really good analogy for how an enzyme works. Your enzymes are kind of like your car key, right? Like your key to your car doesn't have any energy. You know, like your car doesn't run on your key. It runs on gasoline, right? Probably. I don't know the guy Tesla drivers out there. But like, you know, it runs on fuel, right? It runs on gasoline, but it can't use that fuel until you kick it off by like turning the ignition. And then that is what like turns over the engine and, you know, causes you to start burning up that gasoline, firing the pistons and everything, right? Like that's why we call it a lock and key mechanism. Our bodies mostly run on carbohydrates. And then we also run on fat. But we can make ourselves more efficient at doing those things by having a lot of enzymes. And those enzymes allow us to kind of unlock the energy from carbohydrates and fats and proteins very quickly and efficiently. For my students who have been with me a little bit longer, we talked about the Krebs cycle, right? That big, long, complicated wheel of all those individual like little pieces spitting off energy here and here and here, right? That's happening because of enzymes. Every enzyme kicks off the next part of the wheel. So it sort of works its way through. We'll go over the Krebs cycle in just a second here. So that's chemical, that's our chemical energy release, right? So there is a little bit of energy that does get released every time you break a chemical bond, by the way. It's kind of fun, actually. You think about like an atom bomb, you know, like that's, you take an individual, you just broke it and tons of energy got released, right? Because we broke down the smallest unit in the universe. Which we shouldn't have done. But like, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of like nuclear energy, but like, you know, that's what a nuclear power plant is. Big fan of that. But look at how much energy gets released when we split up that chemical bond, right? That's what happens. You split up a carbohydrate, energy gets released. You split up a protein, energy gets released, right? You know, when you break stuff in this universe, energy is released. Think about like just breaking a stick. You hear the energy, right? It breaks it. And then like the friction, you know, like it's even if you were to like measure the temperature at like a very small level, you would actually see the temperature is a little bit higher where you broke it. And that's what happens at a chemical level as well. Whenever you break the bonds between molecules, energy is released, which is a very important concept because probably the most important molecule that we're going to talk about today is this molecule right here. It's a molecule of what we call ATP. So ATP is this really high energy molecule of adenosine and little phosphates that are attached to it. I did not make these circles big enough. Hold on. You know what? We're gonna write the word first, like a smart person would do. There we go. And we'll just copy that. All right, so there's our molecule of ATP. It kind of looks like this, right? There's this big molecule of adenosine and then 3 little phosphates attached to it. So if we've got this ATP molecule, right? And I just got done saying, whenever we break the bond between a chemical, a bunch of energy is released, right? So when we break the bonds that hold this ATP molecule together, a whole bunch of energy is going to get released. So if I take this 3rd little phosphate right here, and I break this guy off, and I put him over here, right? What's going to happen is a ton of energy is going to get released, and my body's going to capture that energy. Your body's going to capture that energy, and it's going to do a whole bunch of work, right? So when we kick that 3rd phosphate off there, when we break that off, which by the way would be a catabolic reaction, right? That's, you know, taking something complicated and breaking it down. When we break that off, that releases a ton of energy and our body captures that. So ATP is what we refer to when we refer to like energy inside of our body, like, oh, I'm running out of energy to get up this hill, right? What you're really saying is like, I'm running out of ATP. Like we got to find a way to make more ATP. Why are we running out of ATP? Well, it could be because maybe you didn't get a good meal beforehand. Maybe you're just not giving yourself enough recovery, or maybe you're doing an exceptional amount of work. But no matter what happens, your body will adapt afterwards. If you do a crazy amount of work and your body's like, oh, we ran out of ATP, you know what it'll do? It'll get better at making ATP. It'll make more enzymes. It'll make more pumps and things that make ATP. And that's really kind of what this whole course is about, right? We're trying to understand how we create energy and how we manipulate energy as personal trainers. If I get a client who comes to me and they're like, I'm trying to lose weight, right? Great. Okay. I know that I need you to burn lots of calories worth of energy. And so we need to have enough energy to be able to do that, which means I need to make you really good at creating ATP so you can get through the entire duration of the workout. If you get through the entire duration of the workout, you're going to burn lots of calories. Burn lots of calories, you're going to get, you're going to get the results that you hired me for. If I got a client who's trying to work on like their maximal strength, I need to teach them I need to get their body to generate massive amounts of ATP in a really short period of time. They don't care about their endurance. They just want to be able to lift a big, heavy weight once, twice, like a max strength athlete, right? Power lifter.
Question?
Yeah, please.
What would be the quickest way for a quick recovery? Like if I want to say, like, say if somebody did a straight 6-day workout, they rest one day, but they in that 1 day of rest, they want a quick recovery. What would be like the quickest way for that?
That's a good question. I mean, your body's going to recover how your body's going to recover. Honestly, it kind of comes back down to this conversation we're having right now a little bit. This is not really what you're asking, but one of the best ways to get better at recovering would be to train for increased recovery. And you would do that by being good with like as an endurance athlete. So if you built your endurance overall, you actually recover faster on your off days. Like marathon, like you hear those stories, like look at David Goggins, right? He ran how many marathons in like a couple months? He ran a marathon every day. It's like, how could anybody recover from a marathon every day? It's like, well, he had a really good aerobic base. He's also a freak of nature, but like that guy's crazy. But like that's one way. But if you're really trying to recover, I would say make sure you get plenty of carbohydrates, because carbohydrates are our main fuel source. So on your off days, plenty of carbs that are going to refuel you for the next time. Get a full night's sleep. Sleep does not get enough credit. It is incredibly important for us. Sleep is when people ask me, they're like, what's one, if you'd only recommend one supplement, what would it be? And I'd be like, sleep. I would recommend that you get 8 hours of sleep. Like, that's not a supplement. I was like, I know that's not what you wanted me to say, but like, that's the best answer. So plenty of sleep would be huge. Plenty of carbohydrates would be huge. And then honestly, this is going to sound kind of crazy, but like doing something that is fun without being like draining and just, or like being around like, weirdly enough, being around like loved ones or like something like that. What they've shown is that like on your rest days, spending time with like friends and family actually have a pretty positive benefit in terms of your recovery, because your body will make different hormones and stuff that put you in a very de-stressed state versus a very stressed state. We like actually being in a stressed state to a certain level. If we're this high, not so good. But if we get a little bit of stress, that's actually a good thing. Our body goes, oh, I'm a little stressed. I need to overcome this stress. We kind of thrive on it actually. And that's how our body adapts. But de-stressing on your off days, having like a cycle of like stress and then no stress and then stress and then no stress is like a way for your body to go, all right, yeah, because that's how we're programmed, right? Think about it, we're still all running with the same like cave person hardware, where we were running around the plains, like chasing after a creature and then we've got food, but then like 2 days of not seeing anything, so we would like fast and try to like find an animal, and we would have to like survive, and then we would like hunt something down and we'd be good again, and then we'd have a couple days off, it's so like our body is programmed to be very good with those cycles. So it's kind of two answers to your question. One way to get better at recovery is to be a better endurance athlete. And then another way to be better at recovery is, get some rest, do something fun, and get enough sleep and carbohydrates. Fuel yourself back up with carbs in between. That's huge.
Thank you, Red.
Yeah, no sweat. That's a fun question. I love questions because I've taught this lecture a bajillion times, and so like it's always fun to have a little bit of variety coming my way. All right, so let's talk. So if we need to be able to create ATP, right? ATP is how we're going to literally do all the things that we do, right? We need to be able to create ATP, and that is where we have the process of what we call cellular respiration. Most of the course that we are in right now, most of PFT 105 is us understanding cellular respiration. And what cellular respiration is, it is the process that releases energy, creating ATP, from organic compounds. So these are chemical reactions that make ATP. That's what we're saying here. So there's three major steps here. And some of you guys might be thinking, aren't there four? Because I've taught you that there are four. But from a biology standpoint, we're actually only going to talk about three. When we get to exercise metabolism, we will mention the fourth one. But we're going to have three major reactions: glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. So another video for you. Which one? This one, right?
You dream, you plan, you work every hour, every day, every night.
I think
There is
this isn't the one I just showed a couple days ago, right? Yeah, no. Okay. This is kind of a fun one. This is like the amoeba system. This is like a fun little chat. I love these animations. These are actually just like the simplest breakdown. I just love these little cartoon versions, and they got little eyeballs and stuff, so they're kind of cute. But here we go.
Are you a morning person? One of us is, and one of us is definitely not.
Oops, nope, this is the wrong version of the video. I just showed this one the other day. Sorry, guys. Not that one. Oh, man. Oh, wait, no, I did. I showed the... Never mind. I had it right. My apologies. Yeah. All right, here we go.
Are you a morning person? One of us is, and one of us is definitely not. Mainly because when I wake up in the morning, it just takes a while for me to get my energy back. It takes a lot of time and coffee for that to happen for me. Cells really don't have that luxury. They are busy performing cell processes all the time. Active transport of many substances needed for their survival, for example. And the energy currency they need, specifically, is ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. It's a type of nucleic acid, actually, and it is action-packed with 3 phosphates. We have a video all about ATP and how it works as an energy currency. So where am I going with this? Well, cells have to make this ATP. It doesn't really matter what kind of cell you are. Prokaryote or eukaryote, you have to make ATP. The process for making that ATP can be different, however, depending on that type of cell. One way is called aerobic cellular respiration. Lots of organisms can do aerobic cellular respiration, but this video is specifically going to go into aerobic cellular respiration in eukaryotic cells. That means this video is talking about the process within cells that have membrane-bound organelles, such as a nucleus and mitochondria. Eukaryotic cells include the cells you'd find in protists, fungi, animals, and plants. The mitochondria, which can be found in most eukaryotic cells, are going to be kind of a big deal in this aerobic cellular respiration because some of the process occurs in the mitochondria. So let's get started. Remember, the major goal for any organism performing this is to make ATP. Okay, here's the overall look at the equation for aerobic cellular respiration. Remember that reactants, inputs, are on the left side of the arrow, and products, outputs, are on the right side of the arrow. This equation, by the way, looks remarkably similar to photosynthesis. Look at how the reactants and products are on different sides. While that doesn't mean they're simply opposites, it does show that they have substances in common. In photosynthesis, organisms make glucose. Notice how glucose is a product. But in cellular respiration, organisms break the glucose down to make ATP. Fun fact, you know how when a bean seed first germinates in the ground, it isn't able to do photosynthesis yet? Yeah, the germinating bean is relying on glucose that it has stored, and it's doing cellular respiration to break it down to make ATP so it can grow. Of course, once it starts to mature and develop leaves, it can do photosynthesis. It will be able to do both photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Plants make glucose in photosynthesis, and they break it down in cellular respiration. They can do both. But if you aren't photosynthetic, such as a human or an amoeba, you have to find a food source to get your glucose. You need glucose to get this process started, and we're going to assume that we're starting with one glucose molecule. Step 1, glycolysis. This step takes place in the cytoplasm, and this step does not require oxygen. It's considered anaerobic. In glycolysis, glucose, the sugar from the equation, is converted into a more usable form called pyruvate. Glycolysis usually takes a little ATP itself to start up. The net yield from this step is approximately 2 pyruvate and 2 ATP molecules, and 2 NADH. What is NADH? NADH is a coenzyme, and it has the ability to transfer electrons, which will be very useful in making even more ATP later on. We'll get to that in a minute. Now an intermediate step occurs. The 2 pyruvate are transported by active transport into the mitochondria, specifically the mitochondrial matrix. In the mitochondria, pyruvate is oxidized. The 2 pyruvate are converted to 2-acetyl-CoA, which will be used by the next step. Carbon dioxide is released and 2 NADH are produced. Step 2, the Krebs cycle, also called the citric acid cycle, still in the mitochondrial matrix. The citric acid cycle is considered an aerobic process. While the cycle doesn't directly consume oxygen, some of the events in the cycle need oxygen to continue. To learn more about this intricate cycle where the 2-acetyl-CoA will enter, check out the further reading suggestions in the video details. Carbon dioxide is released. We also produce 2 ATP, 6 NADH, and 2 FADH. FADH is also a coenzyme, like NADH, and it will also assist in transferring electrons to make even more ATP. Step 3, the electron transport chain and chemiosmosis. This is just a beautiful thing, really. In eukaryotic cells, this is still in the mitochondria, and to be more specific, it's involving the inner mitochondrial membrane. We do require oxygen for this aerobic step. This is a very complex process, and we are greatly simplifying it by saying that electrons are transferred from the NADH and FADH to protein complexes in electron carriers. The electrons are used to generate a proton gradient, as protons are pumped across to the intermembrane space. All these protons being pumped out into this intermembrane space generates an electrical and chemical gradient. The thing is, if you remember from our cell transport video, ions, like the H+, don't easily travel across membranes directly without something to travel through. The protons can travel through an amazing enzyme called ATP synthase. If I could be any enzyme, I'd be ATP synthase because it has the ability to make ATP by adding a phosphate to ADP. ADP is a precursor to ATP. ADP has 2 phosphates, but if it obtains a 3rd phosphate, it becomes ATP. So, in chemiosmosis, the protons travel down their electrochemical gradient through a portion of the ATP synthase, powering it to make ATP, the ultimate goal. Oxygen is the final acceptor of the electrons. When oxygen combines with 2 hydrogens, you get H2O, water. If you remember from our equation, water is a listed product. Now, the electron transport chain in chemiosmosis step makes a lot more ATP compared to the other 2 previous steps. How much? So I've noticed in my years of teaching and the assortment of textbooks I've collected over the years, there are some different numbers in cellular respiration charts.
By the way, this is totally true. This is super frustrating. The numbers are not very consistent, and we'll actually see a couple different numbers. It's around 32, and that's usually the number I use, but yeah.
In fact, You can even see them change a bit in different editions of the same book. And it's made me want to emphasize that it's important to not just memorize a number, because it really is more of a range. I want to focus less on the number of ATP made per glucose molecule because it depends on a lot of variables. One variable is the gradient we were talking about, how many protons were pumped across the mitochondrial membrane. You can see more variables discussed in the factual references, and those references have estimates ranging from 26 to 34 molecules of ATP per glucose molecule in the electron transport chain and chemiosmosis step alone. Then, if you add the other two steps, Krebs, otherwise known as the citric acid cycle, and glycolysis, you could estimate a range of anywhere between 30 to 38 net ATP molecules total per molecule of glucose. Again, to emphasize a range. Now, this was just one way of creating ATP. But like we had said at the beginning, all cells have to make ATP, but the way they do it can differ. If there's no oxygen available, some cells have the ability to perform a process known as fermentation. It's not as efficient, but it can still make ATP when there isn't oxygen. We have a video about that. We can't emphasize enough how important the process of making ATP is for cells. For example, cyanide, which is found in some rat poisons, can block a step in the electron transport chain, which would block ATP production. A poison that prevents ATP from being produced can be deadly. With the important role that mitochondria have in ATP production, there is also a demand for increased research on mitochondrial diseases. We are confident that the understanding of how to treat these diseases will continue to improve as more people like you ask questions. Well, that's it for the Amoeba Sisters, and we remind you to stay curious.
So let's make that video make a little bit more sense. Because cellular respiration is complicated. So there are going to be three main versions of cellular respiration, right? We are going to have but when we're talking about cellular respiration as a definition, it's how our cells take in nutrients and spit out energy to keep themselves alive, right? We call it cellular respiration because it's kind of the same thing that you're doing right now. You think about like oxygen is life, right? Like you think about the fact that you're breathing in and you're breathing out, and like that's keeping you moving, right? The reason you're doing that on this big level, you know, your mouth and lungs, is because your cells are doing it on a very small level. You know, you're doing it here so that they can do it everywhere else. So they are taking in oxygen and spitting out energy, and CO2. That's where your CO2 comes from. So cellular respiration is how our cells take in nutrients and spit out energy. Now you'll notice the nutrient that we're mostly talking about today is glucose. Obviously fat is a nutrient, obviously proteins are nutrients, but glucose is sort of our main energy producer, and it's where we kind of started producing energy in this world. So we use glucose as our sort of main example here. And basically what's going to happen is you'll have like a molecule of glucose, and we'll put that, we'll call this, you know, there's our molecule of glucose there. And then what's going to happen is it is going to go through glycolysis, right? So glycolysis, glyco coming from the word that actually means sugar. So glyco is sugar, right? And glucose is a sugar. And then again, there's that word lysis that I keep saying we're going to see a lot, right? Lysis is chemical breakdown. So we are breaking down sugar. So this is an anabolic reaction, meaning that it takes place in the fluid of our cells, which is a non-oxygen environment. Our cells are all wet, squishy, swampy areas, right? And what it does is it spits out a little bit of ATP. So it'll spit out over here some ATP, which is great. And then it also spits out a little bit of pyruvates. And pyruvates are sometimes referred to as pyruvic acid. You know, that's actually like, you think about like citric acid, right? Or lactic acid. Both they're very acidic materials. The citric acid found in like fruits and orange juice and things like that is the byproduct of like a plant creating energy. And so like, it's got all this sugar and stuff roaming around in it. It tastes really good. Lactic acid is actually what a pyruvate will become in a non-oxygen environment. So now imagine you take that orange juice, right? And you're going to pour it into like a cup, and you're going to put a lid on that cup, and you're going to let it sit there for a little while. What's going to eventually happen is all the oxygen that was like left in, like, let's say you filled the cup up with like this much orange juice, you left that much empty space. There's some oxygen in that empty space, but if you put the lid on, all the little bacteria and enzymes and little creatures that are living in that orange juice, I know that's not fun to think about, but yes, there are like little bacterias and stuff living in everything that we touch constantly. All of that like bacteria is going to eat up all that oxygen. And what'll happen is that orange juice is going to get even more like kind of sour, and it's going to get where it'll ferment. Eventually, that it could become like alcohol. It can actually break down into like different alcohols and stuff. It can fully ferment, right? But it gets kind of sour and kind of tangy, and that's what pyruvates do in a non-oxygen environment. They become like citric acid. Now in our cells, they become lactic acid. And so whenever you're, breaking down glucose in glycolysis, you get some ATP. In fact, you get it really fast. It's like spitting out ATP really, 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 really rapidly. But every time you do it, you're creating 2 pyruvates as well. And those pyruvates ferment because this is a non-oxygen environment. And when they ferment, they become lactic acid. So those pyruvates will become lactic acid. And now lactic acid is actually going to go into the mitochondria of the cell. And it's going to go through our aerobic metabolism. It's going to go through the Krebs, or we can sometimes call this the citric acid cycle. Trying to make sure I space this out correctly. So that lactic acid goes into the Krebs cycle. And now what the Krebs cycle is going to do is it's going to spit out some more ATP. So we got ATP as sort of a product here, right? But it also makes a byproduct. Just like our byproduct of glycolysis was the pyruvates. Well, now the byproduct of the Krebs cycle is going to be this stuff called NAD and FAD. So we'll say NAD and FADH, I guess. So NAD and FAD, okay? Those are byproducts. And now those byproducts are going to go, I am running out of room, God dang it. Those byproducts are going to go through the next cycle, which is called the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain is going to spit out a massive amount of ATP. And then it's also going to have some byproducts there. Those byproducts are going to be like CO2 and water. That's what's left over. So let's look at this original glucose molecule one more time, right? This glucose molecule gets broken down by the fluid of our cells in a process that we call glycolysis. And that gives our cells 2 molecules of ATP. But it also gives us this pyruvic acid stuff, which ferments, because it's a non-oxygen environment, this is all happening into lactic acid. And then that lactic acid is going to go into the Krebs cycle. And the Krebs cycle is like, oh, this is the byproduct? Great, I'll use this as my ingredients, right? So the Krebs cycle actually uses the byproduct of glycolysis, right? It's a recycling situation, right? So it uses that to produce 2 more molecules of ATP. But then its byproduct is NAD and FAD. And NAD and FAD go through our 3rd process here, the electron transport chain. And the electron transport chain spits out a massive, whopping 32-ish molecules of ATP. So we get 2 molecules of ATP here. We get 2 more molecules of ATP here. And then we get 32 molecules of ATP over here. And that's how much we're sort of spitting out every time. And then, like I said, the byproducts here, you're going to get a little bit of like CO2 as well as a byproduct from right here. You're going to get a little bit of CO2 and water as a byproduct over here. Why did I spell water? I could have just written H2O. So like that's sort of our byproduct on this side of things. Those byproducts we don't really use for anything else. Like those byproducts are kind of just done. There we go. So yeah, so that is what's happening. So glycolysis is all these little enzymes that are in your fluid of all your cells are going to break down to yield a little bit of lactic acid or pyruvic acid and a little bit of ATP. So this is an anabolic reaction, you know, and again, we call it it's easy to remember that it's anabolic because it's in a fluid, right? We can't breathe underwater. So that's the fluid portion, right? And that is going to spit out very large amounts of ATP very quickly, right? Or I should say more accurately, very small amounts of ATP very quickly, resulting in a large amount getting produced, right? Like imagine if like, you know, if I was giving you like a $10 bill every minute on the minute, right? That's great. It's a big chunk of money. But would you rather have that, or would you rather have me give you a $1 bill every second? Because that's $60 a minute, right? So that's kind of what glycolysis is. It's like 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. You know, like it's just spitting out little bits of energy. It's spitting out 2 molecules of ATP. But the problem is, whenever I give you one of those dollars every second, guess what? I'm also going to give you this other stuff, you know, like a byproduct of some type, you know. And so that byproduct is actually going to be an ingredient in the next step. So if oxygen is present in the right amounts, pyruvic acid can go into our aerobic pathways, the citric acid cycle and the electron transport chain. So both of these actions are aerobic, okay? So aerobic reactions take place in the mitochondria, right? Your mitochondria are kind of like, they kind of look like these like little potato bugs, but they are these little pill-shaped things that kind of live, they live inside of our cells. If we look at a cell anatomy, basic one, there we go, there's a pretty simple one. So you can see here, right, all of this empty space, is the fluid, and then there's a little mitochondria there, there's a little mitochondria there. So your mitochondria are where there's little air pockets, and so oxygen's going to get like transported there, you know, because it's got to go through all this, like it's going to get carried through all this. Oxygen goes in there, and then the mitochondria is where the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain take place. The Krebs cycle, the citric acid cycle, takes all of that lactic acid, all that like lactic pyruvic acid, you know, and it breaks it down. And look at this big complicated wheel. This is what the Krebs cycle looks like. Look at this crazy freaking complicated looking wheel here, right? Luckily, we don't have to memorize any of this. We don't really even need to go super in depth into it, but look at all this, right? Well, what that's doing is like, see how it's spitting out NAD and NADH, and then you'll see some FAD over here and FADH, right? So NAD and FAD, right? So it's spitting that out. And then also a little bit of ATP. You do get some ATP in the Krebs cycle. You get a little bit of energy, but like really what you're creating is a lot of NAD and FAD. And that's the byproduct, right? So the product is ATP. The byproduct is the NAD and FAD. And then we recycle NAD and FAD one more time. In fact, we recycle it so efficiently that we get 32 molecules of ATP. So the Krebs cycle relies on glycolysis, and the electron transport chain relies on the Krebs cycle. Your body is the most efficient recycling plant on the freaking planet. You know, and the only thing we're left with as a byproduct is water, which we could use for other stuff, and CO2, which we're going to exhale. And this is why we have such a good relationship with plants, right? We exhale CO2. Guess what the plants breathe? They breathe CO2, right? And they spit out oxygen, and we breathe oxygen, right? So like, you know, you could say that we're farming plants, but I would argue that plants are farming us, depending on who you ask. So that is the citric acid cycle, right? So we're going to yield that pyruvic acid is going to combine with all those little enzymes. These are all little enzymes, by the way, kicking off chemical reactions to spit out some really high energy electrons, which we're calling NAD and FAD, NAD and FAD. And so those, yeah, we and then it's going through, it's kind of saying the same thing here. So even more reactions are synthesizing even more ATP and even more electrons, so even more NAD and FAD, right? And that's why it's like this big complicated wheel. So it goes through decarboxylation, oxidation, and acetyl-CoA formation. Don't worry about knowing those terms. They're just in there for me to say. But they are going from here to here to here to here to here to here to here, and just spitting out little bits of NAD, little bits of fat, and a little bit of ATP. We get a little bit of energy, and we get a lot of byproduct. And the byproduct is what allows us to do this electron transport chain. Now, the electron transport chain is incredibly complicated, but basically think of that NAD and FAD as having a whole bunch of like little protons, and protons are like this very small unit in the universe. And when they get all squeezed together, you create a really high energy molecule, ATP, right? So basically we squeeze NAD and FAD together and we get ATP. A little bit of byproduct left over, CO2 and H2O, water. So you can see there, right? There's the little protons, and they get squeezed through this little pump to spit out massive, massive, massive amounts of ATP. Very, very complicated in reality, but honestly not as complicated in the way that we look at it, right? So both of these are aerobic processes, right? They both take place in the mitochondria, which is an air bubble. So this section here is very anaerobic. And this, that's not going to help you guys. This chart's getting kind of messy. Glycolysis is anaerobic. You know, I guess I could just make it that. Right, so this is very anaerobic. That's why it's called anaerobic glycolysis. And then this is aerobic. And this is also aerobic. You know, air from the word that means air, by the way. So it takes oxygen in order to be able to do that. And that's what we're going to be talking about over the next few weeks. So that is kind of your intro, guys. We've introduced this idea of energy production, which if you're an expert already and you just, after hearing all that, congratulations, you're much better at understanding this stuff than I ever have been. We are going to go over this much more in depth, understanding like how we do glycolysis, how it actually works. Then we'll also go through each of these processes individually. But today is the brief overview. You get the preview of why this stuff is relevant and why it's important. So summarizing everything up into a couple little bits of information here. Chemical reactions store and use the energy, right? Chemical reactions either break stuff down catabolically or build stuff back up anabolically. So we eat carbohydrates, which are very complicated, and we eat proteins, which are extremely, extremely complicated, and we eat fats, which are complicated, although much simpler than the other two. We eat those three things and they break down into individual molecules. So we catabolically break down our food and then we anabolically use that to produce new molecules, either new molecules of us or new molecules that just give us energy. Glucose in particular being our favorite source of energy. So glucose will catabolically break down into ATP, and then we break ATP down even further, and we wreck our ATP in order to sort of release our energy. And a lot of that energy gets released as, you know, us doing work, but some of it gets released as heat. It's actually why you heat up when you're exercising. And that's where it all kind of goes. So, so we've got three processes. We need to be able to create ATP very regularly. We start with the glycolysis, then we move into the citric acid cycle before ending in the electron transport chain. So now we're going to draw connections to this stuff later, but this is the difference between, do you want to be an athlete who's really good at glycolysis? Do you want to be an athlete who's really good at the aerobic metabolism, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain? What type of athlete do you want to be? It's going to depend. You know, if you're a very explosive athlete, well, you're probably going to stay anaerobic. You're going to train anaerobically. I'm not going to make you do long duration cardio. You know, going for a jog would be the worst thing in the world for a very explosive athlete. But if I got you, if you're playing, you know, a full 60 minutes of a sport nonstop, well, then I want to make you pretty good at the aerobic part of metabolism. And I care a little bit less about explosiveness. So we're going to come back to these terms consistently throughout the next 12 days. But guys, that is actually about all I've got for you today. That is the end of your first lesson. Very complicated. That's probably our most complicated day one lesson. I think out of the whole 9-month program, I think that this is probably the hardest hitting one. Tomorrow's a little bit easier. Tomorrow's actually way easier. It's way grosser. We're going to be talking about digestion tomorrow, so it's going to get nasty. But it is definitely less complicated. But before I let you guys go, any questions, comments, or concerns from anybody?
I have a question.
What you got?
I know we talk about glucose in the body, but I wanted to ask about protein, like how much protein the body needs every day, like
Actually, I have a very easy answer for you. The recommended amount of protein for a sedentary person would be 0.8 grams of protein for every 1 kilogram of body weight. If you get that much protein, you are ensuring that you are in what we call a positive protein balance, meaning there's more protein coming in than there is protein going out. Because you're damaging proteins all the time, again, right? Like, so there's more protein coming in than there is protein going out, which means you can continually use that protein. So 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight if you're sedentary. Now, exercise damages proteins, so you'll need more than that. And that's where you'll usually get somewhere between 1.4 and 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. That's our recommendations.
Per kilogram, okay.
Yep. So me, I weigh about 87 kilograms. Is that right? I think hold on. 81. Nope. 81 kilograms. So 81 kilograms. So if I was like really going high on the protein, 1.6. I would do like 1.6 grams per kilogram. I would need at least 130 grams a day. Some people will take it up as high as 1.8 grams. Some people will take it as high as 1 gram per pound, which would be 2.2 grams per kilogram. That's a lot. Here's the thing. If you eat too much protein, it's not really that big a deal because your body will just, you know, eating too much protein doesn't make your body make more muscle. All it does is go, all right, great. Well, I'm just going to turn that into glucose. And your body takes protein, turns it into sugar, and then it just uses it for energy the way it would, you know, normally. So going overboard on the protein, not that bad for you, although there is some extra byproducts. You're left with like extra nitrogen, which kind of builds up in your system and makes you have like really bad body odor and your pee smells worse and your kidneys have to work a little harder. So I don't recommend going super high on the protein either, but yeah, that's my recommendation. Anywhere from 0.8 if you're sedentary to about 1.6 if you're active per kilogram.
Okay, thank you.
Shockingly, by the way, that answer, I think that's going to come up. That may be in tomorrow's lesson actually, but I don't think it is. I think it's on day 11 of this class. We'll see those numbers again. Any other questions though? That was a fun one. Daryl?
Yeah, that's kind of hilarious considering Chipotle gives you 4 ounces of meat. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, 4 ounces of, yeah, I mean, there's probably 40 grams like in a typical burrito. About half, it's almost a 30 day's worth, you know?
Yeah, but they like to say like, oh, we're giving you so much, 4 ounces is a lot. I'm like, okay, now.
Well, you don't want to get all your protein from one meal.
I do.
That's fair. That's fair. That's why the protein shake was invented, right? Al, Silos, how you guys feeling?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
good.
I just been taking notes this whole time.
Love that. It is a lot. It's a lot on day one. There's a lot of notes to take, but today is also meant to be like a broad overview, and then we get more specific, and fill it all in. So.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I was listening to the consuming of protein and stuff because in high school I was more about mass and being real big.
Yeah.
And even when I was in camp too for a little bit and training too, I was more about, because my coach would tell me, he's like, you don't want to be too big because it'd be hard for you to swing. You have too much weight when you're pulling. He's like, it's by the time you're going to hit somebody, they're going to already throw like 2 or 3 hits on you. You know what I mean?
100%.
And but see me, everybody knew me as being real bulky and big, so my protein consists of like a lot of like pasta, ground beef, like little burger patties, like made with potato, like no really that much salt, nothing really with salt, too much salt with it, and my mom, actually it was my mom who showed me and was training me, like feeding me like what I needed to eat. I had to eat. I was eating every 2 to 3 hours of protein.
Yeah. Also, yeah.
But yeah, this is really good information now. So I'm really gonna get back into the workout scene again, hard.
Love that. Love to hear that. Al, how you feeling?
I'm good. I'm still trying to digest all this.
Yeah, no pun intended. Awesome. Well, that sounds, it's like I said, we're gonna revisit these things. It's very circular. So tomorrow we'll get into the catabolic stuff because we're talking about nutrition, and then eventually we'll get into anabolic stuff when we get into like muscle building.
I do have a question though.
Yeah, what you got?
So for like a quiz, it's just gonna be solely what we have on the PowerPoint, or we have to do our own like YouTube research?
No. So homework questions will come from the PowerPoints and from my notes. They should all be in there. Every now and then there'll be something that's like textbook only, or something that like every now and then I do miss stuff and I'll mention it, but then it won't be, but like that's really rare. In fact, honestly, I shouldn't even say it because I'm pretty sure we haven't missed anything in a while, but yeah, so the homeworks will be from the notes and from the PowerPoints.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And then any chapters that I do say, I'm like, if I do say something like read this, that will sometimes have, like in this program design class coming up, there's no book for this course we're in right now, and there's no book for the next one either. They're just PowerPoint classes, but the third one, there's a little booklet that I'm going to give you guys. And that will have a couple, like I'm going to tell you, I'm like, read this chapter, and that'll have some answers, but that's not going to happen until the end of the month.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. All right, guys, I'll kill the recording.